Hello, and welcome to the Collective Church podcast. These messages are from our Sunday services at the Collective Church in Bouiss, Idaho. If you are new with us or just checking us out, please visit our website at collectivechurch.org. We would love to hear from you and connect with you. We pray that this message is both uplifting and encouraging.
God took me all over the place this week. I've only preached, this is my second time preaching, so preparing for a sermon, I'm not used to it yet. It took me way longer than it probably should have. And I felt like I landed on Esther. We're going to be going through the book of Esther, okay? But I also felt like God was like, you could go through Abraham. You could talk about how God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son, and he got up the next morning, and he went, and he did it. And what an incredible story of faith that is. But I felt like God landed me in Esther, and the interesting thing about Esther is that it does not mention God once. Have you guys noticed that? I was reading some articles about Esther, and I was like, wow, it doesn't even mention God's name once. And what I felt like was in that for us this morning is that we all encounter problems in life or mountains that we have to overcome. And we don't always get the Abraham story of God told him to go sacrifice his son. God said, go sacrifice your son. If God came down and told me something, I hope I would do it. But sometimes we don't always get that luxury of hearing God so clearly. Sometimes we're just walking through muddy life, trying to figure this thing called faith out, right? And that's what I feel like we see in Esther. So here we go. I'm going to cover however many chapters of Esther in 5 minutes. Ready? The characters in the book of Esther, a young Jewish girl, her cousin and guardian, Mordecai, the king of Persia, King Xerxes, and his high official and right-hand man, I meant to ask Justin how to pronounce his name. Haman? Haman? Okay, perfect. And it takes place in Persia during the Jewish exile. Esther, who is a young Jewish girl, enters a beauty pageant and gets chosen to be the new wife of King Xerxes. The cousin of Esther, Mordecai, refuses to bow down to Haman, the right-hand man guy, remember, the most powerful official of King Xerxes. Haman becomes enraged by Mordecai and ultimately convinces the king to write a decree that all the Jews will be killed on a specific day in March. Mordecai begins to mourn and grieve this decree very publicly to the point where Esther hears about it, and they begin this conversation back and forth. Mordecai is urging Esther to go to the king and beg for mercy on behalf of all Jewish people. And in this culture, anyone who approaches the king without being invited pretty much gets killed, depending on the king's mood. Okay, nice. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther: don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this? And Esther replies, go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same, and then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die. And on the 3rd day of fasting, Esther approaches the king, and sure enough, he holds out the gold scepter to her, which means he was approving and was showing her favor, and asks her, what are your requests? Anything you want, up to half the kingdom is yours. And I love this part. She doesn't tell him what her requests are. I'm like, there's your opportunity. He's like, up to half the kingdom. Like, start begging for mercy for the Jews, right? She ends up holding off on her request initially, wines and dines them. I mean, she goes over the top, inviting them to these dinner parties until eventually Haman is caught in a web of his own destruction. He gets executed, and King Xerxes cannot undo his decree, so he makes another decree allowing the Jews to defend themselves. They ultimately prevail, saving their own lives and destroying their enemies, and Mordecai is elevated in the kingdom. How'd I do? Quick overview of Esther. There it is. Okay. I know some of us are like, yes, I know that story. It's so familiar. I feel like I always need to brush up on the facts of stories. So what is presented in Esther is this massive problem. She's like, I'm the wife of a king. I have luxury and comfort. I'm good. And then this problem just like falls in her lap. And she's like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I want to tell you this morning that God is in the business of making the impossible possible. We all are in seasons where something feels impossible. As I was thinking about this, we talk often about like valleys and seasons of valleys and seasons of mountaintops. I feel like we live most of our lives in the valley. I mean, think about if you like to hike, how much of your hike is spent in the valley versus the mountaintop, right? Or how much of your preparation for that hike is spent running in the valley versus running to the mountaintop. We don't make our homes on the mountaintop. We make our homes in the valley because that's where the streams of life are. Now I'm getting off my notes, so I'm going to go back. But the picture I got from God was that of a valley. These are our seasons of life where what happens in the valley, we have very limited vision, right? The four of us here, we grew up in Sun Valley. Like, you can't see out. There's mountains on either side. You're driving down Highway 75 and you just can't see anything. You don't really know where you're going. So in the valleys of life, we don't always get to see that big bird's eye view picture of what's happening in our life. And so the first thing I wanted to touch on this morning that I feel like Esther had to do in this story is to suspend our need or desire to understand. We all would really love to be able to see A plus B equals C. Great. Wouldn't that be awesome if that's how life was? But if that's how life was, why would we need to exercise faith? If I know that A plus B equals C, then I don't actually need faith at all, and I actually don't need to trust anything but myself and the solution. So, she struggled with this. Esther really struggled with this. She says in her response to Mordecai was begging her to go to the king, and she's like, it doesn't make sense. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court without being summoned, he has but one law, that he is to be put to death unless the king hold out to him the golden scepter so that he may live. Her vision was limited. The only outcome she saw was death. She was like, that's what the law is. Duh, like, why should I believe in anything else? And Proverbs 3:5-6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. In 2019, my husband Phil and I were living here in Bouiss, and we had interesting jobs at the time. I was working in whatever restaurant I could find, and he was working as a contract pilot. Anyone who's worked contract work knows it's very unstable, and you don't know what your paycheck is going to be month to month, week to week. So we were in a financially very, very trying time. And I remember going to bed every night and just begging God for peace, like begging him, God, help me not to worry about our financial situation. And instead of not worrying, I would pull out my phone and get on online banking. That was the worst decision. That was not stepping into God's promise for my life. I was trying to figure it out. I needed to understand where the money was going to come from. And I would go through our online banking and I go, okay, if we can lessen the amount of coffees or just not eat meat so much, our grocery bill won't be so expensive. And then my husband would come to bed, and the last thing I would say to him before he turned the light off was we need to work on our grocery budget this month. Just dump my stress on him. And I was begging him for peace. So where was it? I'm going to touch on that in a second. What I wanted to say with that story was what ended up happening was as we were working through that season of life, and I remember we were working through it. There was no voice of God going you need to do this now. We were just trying things. I remember I was at the women's retreat with the collective, and my husband called me and was I'm going to apply for this job. And I was great. He's it's in Hawaii. Okay, great. I actually really love doing new things. So I was all right, I'm on board. Whatever it is, let's just submit it to God and just go for it. See what happens. If you get the job, we'll figure it out. 3 days later, he got the job. We're moving to Hawaii in 3 weeks. It was crazy. Just absolutely crazy. I never could have told you that was going to be the outcome from the prayers, the dark prayers that I was praying, right? That was, we're going to move to Hawaii, one of the most expensive states in the United States, by the way, with little to no money to actually get there. And so, I know, this is supposed to be a hopeful story. I promise it is. But, in retrospect, after moving, 4 months later, a pandemic hits. And sometimes we don't have the vision for something when we're in the middle of it, but we can look back and go, oh my gosh, was that not God's sovereignty and grace in our lives? Because had we been in Boise working as a contract pilot and a server, I can tell you we both would have been out of work, entirely out of work. And instead, God transplanted us to a very expensive state with, by the way, I Googled, I think we were making half of what a family of 3 with one on the way should make in order to live in Hawaii. But we were just trusting that this is what he had for us. And I mean, if you looked at our bank statement the whole time we were in Hawaii, you'd go, that makes no sense. That makes no sense how you guys thrived. And I don't say that to mean we don't take care of our finances and we don't use wisdom. But when God is in it, he will take care of it. He always does. Okay, so there's the hope. A little aside that I wanted to touch on. As I was asking myself, why do we want to understand so badly? I felt that it was rooted in control. We want to control our outcomes. But control is rooted in something else. Control is rooted in this desire to feel comfortable and to live pain-free. Gosh, I want to live a comfortable and pain-free life so bad sometimes. But that's just not what God has in store for us. And what I realized is if adulthood has taught me anything, it's that living easily and comfortably doesn't create change, right? I want to live that comfortable life so bad, but then I live that comfortable life and I get bored. I'm I don't want this at all, actually. I want to grow. I want to do new things. I want to reach new heights. That is how God created us. And the easiest thing I can think of as an example for this is childbirth. We're taught our whole lives to avoid pain. And then in my first childbirth education class, they were actually, no. In order to have a baby, you have to accept the fact that pain is good. That pain is actually achieving this beautiful outcome of life. So, that my little aside is that we would be people that don't run from pain. This is our desires to understand because we want to be able to control and feel somewhat comfortable and at ease. But giving up our desire to understand is saying, okay, I can do hard things. Everybody say, I can do hard things. I can do hard things. Yes, we need to believe that we can do hard things. All right, the second thing I really felt like Esther had to embrace in this decision for her to approach the king was to submit to authority and surrender her will. Have you guys ever seen Portlandia? Anyone? Is that too old? I don't know. There's this episode of Portlandia where they're just like sitting at a four-way stop and Fred, is it Fred Arneson? He's like, no, you go. And the other guy's, no, you go. No, you go. And they do this for like 10 minutes. No, you go. It means to yield. The definition of surrender is to give oneself up into the power of another, to yield. We see a perfect example of this in Jesus in Luke 22:42. And he's begging God, spare me from this pain. Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet, I want your will to be done, not mine. This is humility at its finest. Your will, not mine. It means yielding our way, even if it's painful, even if we feel entitled to more, even if we feel offended. Your way, God, not mine. Do you ever, and this is going to touch on the story I shared before, but do you ever feel like you pray for something like peace, like a promise of God, but you don't experience it? Like me laying in bed, looking at our bank statement, begging God to free me from worry. Experiencing the promises of God comes with a level of surrender we might not feel ready for. I think we only experience the amount of promise from God that we are willing to give him authority. Let me explain that with Esther. Her initial statement about not wanting to approach the king was coming from a place of fear of dying, which is a pretty legitimate fear, right? She ultimately laid down her will and then approached the king. How many of you guys think she felt, I actually want a show of hands, did Esther feel afraid when she approached the king? Likely she still felt fear, right? But she was not operating out of fear. She was operating out of faith. If she had been operating out of fear, she never would have approached the king. She would have stayed right where she was. The presence of God was giving her freedom from fear to the level at which she was willing to submit. I feel like this is a word for us as American Christians, that we're going to experience the promise of God at the level in which we're willing to surrender our will. So when we pray for peace, it manifests only when we get out of the way. So I feel like we need to hear this, because we end up, what happens when we, at least for me, when I pray for freedom from something, freedom from worry, let's take that example, and then I don't see it manifested in my life, I'm like, but then God, that's on you. Why didn't you manifest that? And I get angry and annoyed at God. Like, I'm praying for peace. I am praying for this. But am I getting out of the way? Am I actually surrendering my will so that he can have full reign over everything? So Esther was willing to submit completely, giving her the ability to step into God's promise of freedom. A group of us have been going through the Intro to the Holy Spirit by John Bevere. If you have not read it, I highly recommend it. He talks about it this way. The scripture, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. John Bevere describes it, where the Spirit is Lord, there is freedom. Freedom is not everywhere. And he talks about this in the book. He's like, is there freedom in bars? Is there freedom in brothels? No. Why? Because Spirit is not Lord there. We might have accepted Jesus into our hearts, but have we made him Lord of our lives? He has to be in charge, fully in charge. We have a couple toddlers. One is 2.5, And if you want to see a battle of wills, have kids. It's awesome. So our 2.5-year-old right now is kind of in this phase that phase of like, I do it. No, I do it. Everything has to be his way. At the moment, it's anything from tying his own shoe to cutting his own waffles, zipping up his own jacket, putting on his own seatbelt, right? All of these things which maybe in about 6 months he actually will be able to do. But right now he's trying. It's really beautiful. He's trying so hard. But if I reach in to try and help him, this actually happened like 3 times yesterday. I'm standing there watching him. Even if I just like look at him like I'm going to help him, he's like, no. I don't even have to touch his coat. If I just look at him like, you need a hand? Timeout, mommy. Go to timeout. I'm like, oh boy. Okay. So I just stand there and I try not to look at him. And I just let him like try and zip up his coat. And he's struggling. 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Who knows how long he'll struggle for? Because he's got a strong will. And strong-willed child, that's like every person on the planet. All right? We are all strong-willed people. So he's sitting there. He's trying to do his coat. And finally, he'll just look up and go, help me. Okay, buddy, I'll help you. I'm happy. It's like the best thing in the world. I'm like, I'm happy to help you, right? Let's do this. Let's get your coat on so we can go. And I think it's such a beautiful picture of our relationship with our Father. He's so patient and he's so gentle to wait for us to give up our will so he can kind of step in and help us. And to take that metaphor just a step farther, I also feel like it'd be as if I was getting ready to take my son out to ice cream, but I haven't told him I'm going to take him out to ice cream. I'm like, hey, I got a surprise for you, buddy. It's going to be so much fun. But he's struggling with his coat. He has to suspend his desire to understand and know what's going to happen, even though I'm like, it's going to be great. It's that moment of trust, right? Do you trust your mama that it's going to be great? I promise it's going to be great. But as humans, we just want to know. We want to know where we're headed and what we're up to. All right, so the third thing I felt like in Esther she had in her life was she was surrounded with people who called her out. So surround yourself with people who will call you out and call you up. When I read this story, that moment that Esther surrenders to God's will is directly following the moment her cousin calls out her destiny. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this? Let's not underestimate how much God is using us in each other's lives. I love encouraging words. They're beautiful and they're gifts from God, but I'm talking about people in your life that will tell you difficult things, that will ask you difficult questions, that will challenge you and call you to do hard things, not running from pain, but pressing on and persevering. Mordecai could have said to Esther, oh, Esther, you're doing such a great job as king or as queen. If you have the opportunity, like next time you just kind of run into the king, would you mind mentioning this whole decree about the Jews? That'd be awesome. Right? That's not what he said. He was like, this is urgent. And if God doesn't use you, he will use someone else. Actually, they don't say God. They say the Jews will find relief from somewhere else. So Mordecai sees big picture and elevates Esther, calls her into greater levels of surrender and faith. So I have a question for you guys. Why do we come to church? Any thoughts? You guys ever think about that? Why do we come to church? Is it just to go through the motions? Is it just for religious? I don't know. I think about this all the time. What is church for? I feel like church has to be at some level for offering our faith to each other. That we come, because we're all walking through valleys of some kind, to offer each other an elevation. I see this in your life. It's really hard for us to see our own way through our own valley. But oftentimes when you're not the one in the valley, you can see the way out for somebody else, right? It's extending that faith for somebody else, helping them to elevate, giving them the bird's eye view. Hey, hang on. I see this happening, right? That's why I come to church, but I want more of that. I'm going to go ahead and say it. The last thing I felt like God was speaking to me about Esther is that we got to shake what your mama gave you. It's like, am I allowed to say that in church? I don't know, but I just did. Shake what your mama gave you. What does that mean? I mean, it requires us to bring ourselves. I think for the longest time, I felt like I would do this kind of Christianese walk of like, yes, I'm surrendering my will, okay? I'm getting out of the way, God, so you can do it all. You can do everything. You can come provide. I'm just going to stand back and let you do your thing. But unbelief grows in inaction. God wants to use us. He doesn't need to use us, but he wants to use us. We are not sloths. We are not puppets in this thing called life. We don't surrender our will and then just have God just like be puppeteer over us. He created us in his image to step into our identities, to partner with his plans for the world. Mordecai called out to Queen Esther, who knows if perhaps you were born for such a time as this? And I feel like sometimes we get caught up in like, well, what is my calling, right? Like, what am I supposed to do? What are you calling me? What is it I'm even supposed to be doing in this life? If it's not like, let me rephrase that. Sometimes I think we hear like faith without works is dead, but we think of works as like, oh, where's the like nearest mission or mission trip? I got to sign up for that, right? We think of works as that, but works is like working out our faith. It's trying something using our God-given skills and abilities. It's doing something, right? All right. Here's what I feel like Esther did. She was a great entertainer. She was extremely hot, and she was a bit cunning. The king asked her, what would you like? What are your requests? Up to half the kingdom. And she goes, why don't you come to a dinner party? What? Why? She was using her abilities. She was like, I got the favor. I'm going to win a little bit more favor because I have a big ask for this king. I'm asking him to save all the Jewish people. So she's like, all right, come to a dinner party. Wines and dines them. I imagine she was gorgeous. She might have used what her mama gave her, right? Really going to get in trouble with that. So she's a bit cunning. And then she does it again. The king says, whatever you want, I'll give it to you. All right, come to a dinner party again. I love it. And then through what we see in this, even though God's never mentioned, is the sovereignty of God through this whole story. It wasn't just Esther's obedience in walking this thing out. It was also God's sovereignty. He woke the king up in the middle of the night with like a dream or a memory about how Mordecai had actually saved his life earlier in his life. So like God was speaking through this whole thing, but her obedience is what really allowed it all to take place. Okay. What I want to charge you with this morning is that if you are in a season where you are struggling to see your way out, there is hope, there are answers, there are possibilities and opportunities that you may not be able to see. So surround yourself with people that can help you see it and walk you through it. God is so much more creative than we give him credit for. Just because we can't see our way out doesn't mean there isn't a way. And open yourself to receive what God has in store for you. So surrendering our will so we can experience his promises. And I promise it's not pain-free. I'm going to just go ahead and tell you that right now. Hard things are what this life is sometimes all about. It's not pain-free, but it's bigger than we can understand or see. He has come to bring life to the areas of our lives that are decaying, but we have to let him in, and we have to let him have full reign. Yes? I know that's like a whole lot of steps, right? We're just going to go over them real quick. Suspend our need or desire to understand. Submit to his authority and surrender your will. Surround yourself with people who will call you out and call you up. Shake what your mama gave you. Yeah? So if you feel stuck this morning, we're going to have some prayer teams on either side. I feel like whenever I say that phrase to myself, like, oh, I feel stuck, God is doing something. It's whether or not we're willing to engage in what he's doing. And so this morning, as we have prayer and the worship team plays, any of these things, we would love to pray for you. We would love to help you unstick. We would love to lend our faith to you and vice versa. Okay? Love you guys.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this message and would like to learn more, you can join us in person or online for services at 10 a.m. on Sundays. We would also love to connect with you. You can fill out a Connect card on our website at collectivechurch.org and also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.